let's go back to.
Okay.
Well, what do you remember of?
I had
So
a
your dad's side. Did you know your dad's dad at all?
No.
Did you ever meet him?
No, I never met anybody except my grandmother, or who what I thought was my grandmother, one
Huh.
time, and I have no remembrance of her
Right.
outside of the black that she wore a black dress.
So that was all like, they were all Chehalis though.
Oh
I
no,
mean,
no,
or were
no,
they somewhere else?
no, no. She lived in Oregon,
Okay.
and apparently I think from what I heard, she was afraid of my father. And
Huh.
so they were not close at all.
Interesting.
You know, it really was.
And what do you remember of him? I mean, well,
I don't
you
remember
yeah,
anything.
You were 6.
I don't remember
So it's all
anything.
secondhand.
Yeah. And the
So-
things that I remember from there is that I had, living in Chehalis before we left, I had a dog. I don't remember anything about it, but I knew I had a dog. And every Friday during the season, my mother always made fried oysters and French fries,
Wow.
or fried clams and French fries. You know, that's the only thing I remember of there.
Oh. And so then you flash forward to
Well, now-
basically you come down to LA. But let's
Yeah.
go back. Let's go back
Okay.
on your
all right.
like on the McFadden. What about like
Okay. Now-
okay, what do you remember? So there's your mom. What about her folks? Do you remember like the Obadiah?
No,
or
he died.
B.O.?
He died before I was born. My grandparents died before I was born.
And her mother died before you were born, right?
Yes. Well,
So they were
yeah,
all-
because my mother, my grandmother, on my mother's side, well, the one that birthed my mother, she died within a few months of my mother being born.
Okay.
And I knew that, I didn't know, but when I contacted the Historical Society, because they have a large thing for O.B. Jacob, you know, O.B. McFadden.
Mm-hmm.
And they have all the, I have it, you could have the whole thing. I have a great big folder. They sent me all the originals of the births, the deaths, and so forth, you know, out of the newspapers. Well, my grandmother died in 1899, so obviously my mother was not born in 1900. She was born in 1899.
Right. Because her mother died in 1899.
So her oldest sister was 22 at the time. And so she already was married and had children. So she took my mother and probably Pat, who was Judith McFadden, she probably took her too, because she was only 2 years older than my mother. So she was raised
So
there.
she all of a sudden had 2 more kids.
Mhm.
Wow.
Right.
That were her sisters.
Right. But I know she at least had my mother. I don't know for sure about Judith. People never talked about those things, you know.
Right.
Apparently I met a number of families that lived very close who were cousins. Nobody ever told me they were cousins, you know.
Right.
And later I said, well, these people were your cousins, you know. Shoot, I didn't know it. I was just a very young kid.
Right.
You
Who
know.
was it? I think you were talking about. Boy, this is so slow and clunky now. Remember you were talking about the almonds or the almonds or the almonds or the.
No, I was talking about my cousin named Dorothy Green
Uh-huh.
on there. Her name, my mother's name was Alpha Ambelina, which
Right.
is an old family name. Okay. And one of the grandmothers was named Ambelina, and I don't know which one, but that's where they got the name, and they kept passing the name down. Now, Dot, she hated that name. She hated that name. So when she was of age, she went to court and had it changed to Dorothy.
Okay. But there was,
Okay.
I think, people in here.
Now, these people are my cousins.
Yeah.
Now,
so
them I knew.
Magnus, So you knew the
No,
Hansons.
I knew some of the Hansons, yes. And I remember
But those would have been like your,
cousins.
no, those would have been, so
Oh,
that's
Magnus
your,
Hansen was
so
my.
that would be your uncle. That would be your, no, I'm sorry, your grandparents,
This is my grandfather,
yeah.
and I don't know who he married.
Well,
My-
he married Alpha Ambeline.
No, he didn't.
That's,
Oh,
that's,
he must have. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Because he's a junior. That's a junior.
Yes, because the judge was a senior.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
and then her siblings are Magnus, Harriet, and Harold Hansen,
Wow.
right?
Because I
This
knew.
is the only
I
one
knew,
that we know who when he died.
I knew these two. I knew these.
Who, Harriet and Harold?
Yeah.
And then they had their families.
Yeah.
But then back in here, I don't know why. I remember you relating a story of like families being, living pretty remote and pretty
Oh, yes.
crudely. And
That
I thought
was
it was
the
I thought it was these guys, the Ammons.
It was Hansons. It was the
Okay.
Hansons. And I remember as a young child going up to, not Napavine, but there was another little community up there. And we went to visit them, and they had a dirt floor, just dirt floor, just dirt,
Hmm.
And I was so shocked to see a dirt floor in some place, and that's all I remember. I made one visit up there when I was going in, and that I remember, but I don't remember the details or everything about it,
Hmm.
But yeah, it was a different era. For instance, I lived when I was very young. My mother, before we left, I don't remember when it was, but we lived with my aunt, Rena, out there at the ranch. Oh, I know, I used to spend summers out there. And they had a 360-acre ranch. They had all their own cattle. They had all of their own beef, pork. They butchered everything, I mean, you got to remember, this was probably 32, 33, and they always, when they butchered, the kids would stand around watching. They had a pot that was a pot that was probably at least this large, and they dumped a whole pig into it, and then they would skin it, and do things like that.
Mhm.
That they just, they don't do things like that today. There was never a refrigerator. People didn't have refrigerators. They had a kitchen that was probably larger than this room and that room put together. Wood stove, everything was wood stove that heated everything in there. Um, in the kitchen, they had a section of the wall that went to the outdoors, and it was open. It had grating on the outside and grating inside the kitchen. You opened the cupboard, and that was your cooler. That was where your cooling thing was. They had a very large, full-size basement where they canned hundreds of quarts of everything. From fish, salmon. They cooked fish for salmon and trout and things like that. They dried everything. They dried their own bacon, their own smelt, which was marvelous. We used those for snacks.
Mhm.
And then they cooked I remember every breakfast, there was always a great big pot of oatmeal that was on the back of the stove, this wood stove. Bacon, eggs, oatmeal, toast, everything like that. That was every breakfast.
Big breakfast. Farmer
Oh,
breakfast.
you can't imagine, And when they cooked, when they had harvesting, they had a number of men, that would come in. There were huge tails, uh, like this, of just ears of corn that they would feed them, you know. And whenever they butchered, or whenever anybody in in the area butchered, they always shared with everybody else,
Right.
you know. But that was just normal, you know.
So there was basically a lot of. It's not like you went out and bought a bunch of stuff, right? I mean,
No, you didn't buy anything except flour and sugar and salt. That was about, and they were huge bins of everything, you know.
Right.
But I know, I went to, we must have lived out there. It jungled for me because I don't know when. I lived out there at that place, and my mother went into town to work. But, what was I gonna say? Oh, I went to school out there for at least 1 year, and it was first to sixth grade all in one room. Maybe only two or three kids for each grade, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to school that way, and that was a typical school. You know,
Right.
at that
And that was right in Chehalis, or was that
No.
in Centralia?
No,
or
no,
where was
that was in Forest, which was, it isn't even a community, it's just a bunch of farms, big farms out there,
Where was it near? What was
near
it?
Chehalis.
It's near Chehalis.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
It's 6 miles north,
Okay, so north of Centralia, right?
north of Chehalis. There is, there is Forest and then Chehalis, and then Centralia was further north. Oh, so it would be south, yeah.
South,
It was south.
Okay, yeah,
of
because I remember
Chehalis.
driving north
Mhm.
Chehalis.
Yeah, it's south of Chehalis.
Uh-huh.
But I remember, my aunt used to shoot quail and stuff out of her back porch, you know, to feed people. And the only time they shot stuff was for food.
Yeah,
You know, you don't just
no,
shoot them for fun.
don't waste bullets.
No.
Right.
They had all kinds of chickens and rabbits and geese, anything, you know. And one of the things that I definitely know is I had a lot of cousins, and there were a couple of them that lived with her in their teens when I was very young. And I loved the rabbits. So I always had a pet rabbit, you know, from the group. And that's when they used to kill the rabbits for food.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it, you know. And we'd have them, and so finally one of my mean cousins said, "Hey, that's not chicken, that's rabbit." Oh, I cried and cried and cried. I remember that. And I would never eat anything but the wings from then on, because I knew it was a chicken then, because I would not touch rabbit,
Right.
you know. But and they had this great big stove in the kitchen, and there was a space about this far behind it. They always had a box of babies of some kind, you know, rabbits or chickens. It was too cold or something
Oh, to
like that.
keep them warm.
Yeah, keep them warm. Always. And I always made pets of everything, you know.
Right.
And the only thing I was supposed to do was carry wood in for the wood box. And it used to take me an hour. It was 5 steps from from the house to the woodshed. I hated it. I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I
Mhm.
don't know why.
Huh.
Just wouldn't do it. But they had a huge Bing cherry tree right out in the backyard. I mean, it covered half the backyard, you know. And they had a bunch of cherry trees over at the side of the house. I used to make myself so sick eating cherries, climb up in the trees and eat cherries. I loved the cherries,
Yeah.
you know. And
So,
they
what was
cook-
the place like? What was the house? I mean, what was as what? I
Okay.
mean, was there like, was it a farmhouse with everybody kind of in the same room, or what was the?
No, it was a very large house. Rena's first husband had built it, you know, but it had a very large first floor and second floor. Now they had 4 large bedrooms with walk-in closets on the second floor. One little bathroom that had, all it had room for was a toilet and a bathtub, and that was it. A little tiny sink, but it wasn't as big as 2 of these tables, I swear.
Right.
Very small, and that was for the whole house. That was the only one they had. Now the rooms upstairs were huge, very very large.
Really?
Yeah, and well, maybe they weren't as large as I thought they was because I was a little girl.
Right.
But they had every one of them had walk-in closets. We didn't sleep with blankets. Everybody had feather beds. We slept on feather beds.
Now, what would that mean? What does that what do you mean by a feather bed?
A feather bed is a quilt about this thick, and it's filled with feathers. They made them from this stuff yeah. The only other place I ever saw that was when we went to Europe, and some of the hotels used feather beds.
Oh, like a comforter, like a down comforter.
Very, very warm and everything. Because you could get up in the morning, and if you had, during the winter, and if you had a glass of water, you know, at night, it would be frozen in the morning.
Jeez.
Oh, yeah, it was, you know, that's the way it was.
Right.
You know.
Well, there wasn't
No.
central heat.
No, they had a very large kitchen, then they had a very large other room, and they had a huge table in there, and that was not the sitting room, but it was where everybody stayed, because those 2 rooms were the only 2 rooms that were heated.
Right.
And they had a wood stove there, and you always had a box of dried smelt for snacks. Oh, those are so good. They are so good. I remember. But they all made all their own sausage. There is nothing like homemade sausage. Nothing. You know, I can remember the taste, and you just can't duplicate it. You know. Now, and then that's half of the house. Then there's the toilet. Then the other half of the house was there was the sitting room that was only open. They had double doors that was kept closed all the time. And it was for company only, you know, and it was cold all the time. And I used to love it because they had a player piano in there. Boy, I wish I had that now. This player piano, and I used to spend hours in there. I spent hours. My aunt had a very large, they didn't waste anything, you know, very large box of buttons. And I used to sit there and play with those buttons for a long, long time, you know. And then in the back, and opposite the kitchen, the hall went into going the stairs going up, and then you went into the master bedroom, and there was a fireplace in there. There were 2 fireplaces, and one was in the master bedroom, and the other one was in the formal sitting room, you know.
Right.
But
So they'd fire that up for company.
yeah. And the fireplaces were huge. I could have walked in those things, you know. They were very large, you know. And upstairs, but there was no heat upstairs or anything like that. You know.
So what do you remember of like your? Well, so there would have been the. Who else was living there?
Just my aunt and her husband, and a couple of her children. Anne was one of the younger ones, and then she had a son, Tony. I mean, a younger brother, Tony, and he was the one that was with his father when he was killed. But he was never able to work very much. He worked in the woods, and some logs fell on him and crushed his legs. Not really where he couldn't walk. He could walk, but the all of the veins and everything had been destroyed. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So he was not able to work, but he lived there, and he was mean to me. I still, when I see a drawer open in the closet, I still close it, because he used to tell me he was probably 14, 15, you know. To me, he was just another person, you know. And I assume he was 14, 15. He told me that ghosts lived in closets, and I better be very careful, you know. So, and he scared me so badly. He scared me so badly.
Huh.
And I've never forgotten it, you know, like I say, I still close the doors. I don't want the doors open to closets.
Right. And so does he, tell me about him and his dad, because we weren't recording then. Because that,
Oh, okay. His father, when he was 2 or 3 years old, his father took him out when they were hunting on the property, and they would, I don't know what they did. I mean, I know he was hunting. He had a shotgun with him, and he handed Tony the shotgun, and then he went through a fence, a barbed wire fence, and they don't know what happened, but apparently the gun went off and killed his father. So he came back home. He didn't know. He came back home by himself, and nobody knew, and they knew there was something the matter, you know. So they went out and they found his father dead.
wow,
Yeah,
that's quite a thing to live
yeah.
with and through. And
You know, well, you know, I don't know. Nobody ever. I don't think it's ever been mentioned in his presence. You know, I really don't think so.
huh.
But who knows? But anyway, I had a pretty nice.
And so what happened to that? So you left, but I mean, what happened to that side of the family with Pat and him? And,
Well, Pat, all of them pretty much scattered. Pardon me. And Rena had 4 living children. Obi, the eldest, Obadiah, who was a family name. Obi, who was a salesman for I don't know what, you know, and he traveled around.
okay.
And Obi, and then next was Dot, and then Ann,
Wait, are we in
and
here?
Tony. Wait a minute. No. Here we are. Well, no. Anton Hilla was the first husband. Okay.
Okay.
You don't.
So that's Rena there.
Where's Marina? Right, Marina. Okay.
Right.
All right.
And then, so
that was her first husband. And this was her second husband. Now, she had.
So then these were his,
right.
the highlights.
Obi was. Oh, Doris Hughes. That's his.
That's who he
that's
married.
his wife.
Yeah.
Okay. The ones.
So these are all highlights. All, I mean, 1, 2. There's a Francis.
He died very young.
And then 4
Yeah.
years old.
Right.
Dorothy, she lived till 88.
Yeah. She. That's the one. Dot Green is her married name. She married somebody, and then he died, and then he was a nice man, and then she married Pickering, but
And then
she died.
And then this is
died.
Obadiah.
Okay, what I was going to tell you is the 4 living when they wanted to sell the place were Dot and
Obadiah.
Obi and
Looks like he died pretty young, 10 years old.
yeah, that was the second one that died. But see now, Greg's father was named Robert too after him.
Mm-hmm.
But there was, let me see, there was.
And then there's another Anton here.
That's Tony.
Yeah.
And
then
I
Alpha
thought
Ann.
he was the youngest, but apparently Ann was. Okay, so there were four that were living. There was Dot and these two and
And then-
Obi.
Right.
Okay, when they went to sell the house, when they wanted to sell the house, after everybody had left home, two of them wanted to sell it. Two of them didn't want to sell it.
Right.
And the way the thing was written by whoever registered it was that all, it had to be 100% agreed to it. So for 2 years, they didn't speak to each other because two wanted to sell, two wanted to hold on to the property.
Right.
So it was, I don't know how it was ever settled, you know.
Well, people have to buy other people's interests out of it or
Yeah, but
figure it
at
out.
at that
had to
time,
figure it out.
they didn't do things like that, you know, I don't think.
Huh.
Anyway, so they didn't get along for a while.
And that was in Forest or Chamberlain or out
That was in Forest.
Yeah.
But Rena was too old, and they finally moved her into a home in Chehalis because she was 88 when she died, something like that, you know. But she couldn't take care of herself or that property or anything, and it was finally sold. It was finally
Right.
sold. That's
Huh.
all I know. I don't know who it sold to or anything, you know. But Obi turned out to be a salesman. I think he worked in the lumber industry, you know, which he knew. Dot was married and lived in Montesino, which is very close to Aberdeen.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
She lived there for many years.
Huh.
Okay. And Tony had minor jobs. He finally married, and she was just a delightful person, you know, but she had older children. And Anne married, she married. How come they don't have her? You don't have
I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, she was married twice.
Uh-huh.
And we knew, well, her first husband, Ray, I can't remember his last name, they used to come out to the farm, and he was kind of, he was a very nice person, but yet Ole was her stepfather, you know, and he was, and he would get me a beer, get me this, get me that to Ole, and he would do it, you know, but he wasn't very nice. Then he died, and Anne married a guy we knew, Skeets, I can remember. What was Skeets' last name?
Who?
Skeets.
Oh, so that's Anne from Wenatchee. So that's Anne. Oh, I didn't
right.
know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, oh yeah.
okay.
But he was
Gould.
Gould. Yeah.
Gould.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Gould, that's right. But we would go into dinner. I don't want a black, you know, waiting on me, blah, blah, blah. A very, very prejudiced, very bigoted person.
Mm-hmm.
Just really, really. I mean, he didn't make any bones about it, you know. They bring the Mexicans up here and all they do is propagate, you know. I mean, he would walk into a place and see a Mexican, and this would be very loudly said, you know. He used to just drive me crazy, just drive me crazy.
Wow.
He was very, and Anne never said anything to him about it, you know. I never did understand that. But he died. He had been married before, and she shipped his body over to where his first wife was buried in Seattle.
Mm-hmm. But they lived in, were they?
They lived in Wenatchee.
Right, right.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
He was a, he did sales for, how can I, kitchen products, not food, but the kitchen products like
Right.
an ice cream machine or something
Right.
like that.
Commercial.
Made a lot of money.
Uh-huh.
He was very, very good at it. So anyway, that's what's happened to what happens to those. Now,
But they didn't have any kids, right? And
no,
and
Anne
didn't.
was not able to have children,
Right.
although she would never admit it. She had a hysterectomy when she was 16 years old. Don't ask me why, I wouldn't have any idea.
Huh.
She had some illness, and she would never admit it.
Huh. And so then you go to LA, right?
Yeah.
More or less.
Right, right.
This thing is so.
Actually, it was Encino. Well, no. Viola lived in Van Nuys, and Aunt Kate, my Aunt Kate, lived in Encino. They lived on White Oak Boulevard,
Uh-huh.
and they lived in a place, and George Dinah Shore and her husband lived down there near, and then Donna Michi's used to come and pick us all up for Sunday school every
Wow,
morning.
that's cool.
Well, things were different then. And right down further on the place was where Spencer Tracy lived. And they had he had built a polo field because his son John was deaf. He had 2 children and the son was deaf. So they did a lot of things for him, The polo field was built for him so he could do things,
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
And that.
But
so-
those are people, at the time, they were just people, and so forth.
Right.
And Kate's husband was a policeman. He had a degree in engineering from the University of Scotland, at the University of Scotland, in there. Oh, yeah. But you forget that this was during the Depression. So he couldn't get a job, and he retired as a policeman. He was a good policeman, and he stayed he didn't advance anything. He made no bones about what he thought was going on in the Los Angeles Police Department.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of corruption.
A
Then.
lot of
Big
corruption,
time.
and he would have none of it. So
Wow.
he stayed a patrolman.
So he was Scottish, or did he go to
No,
Scotland?
he was from here. He was from Washington, and he went there to school. Why, I don't know.
Interesting. And so they're in Encino, right?
Yeah.
And what does
Viola was in Van Nuys, and she was a registered nurse.
Mhm.
And Pat was a registered nurse. And they both graduated from the University of Tacoma General Hospital. And that's where I was born. And my mother was going to become a nurse. I should laugh. My mother was going to become a nurse. Turned out she was pretty allergic to blood. She saw blood, she was out.
Oh, okay.
So she never went into that.
Didn't work so
No,
well. Bad
didn't do
combo.
that. Now, when we moved down there, it was in the middle of the Depression. Viola had a job, as a nurse. We lived next door to in Van Nuys, I don't know if he probably was disabled and pretty elderly, Italian gentleman. And my mother went to work as a housekeeper for him because like I said, this was the Depression, And so we lived next door to them, and she was the housekeeper for them. And I remember Patricia and I had to do 2 things when we were kids on Sundays. We had to absolutely listen to the Symphony Hour on radio, and we had to sit on the couch and listen to that. The second thing we had to do was go over and have Sunday dinner with him, an Italian dinner was 3 hours long, and it was you ate everything, and God, we hated it. We just hated it. But that's what we had to do.
Because you had to do it.
We
You'd love to
had-
do it now, but
yeah, I know, but we had to do it then,
Hmm.
And to sit there, 2 kids, and I was I don't remember how it was, but it was. I was
Patricia's
very-
a little older than you, right?
She's 5 years older. She was 5 years older than I.
Uh-huh.
She had quite or Viola had quite a deal, because it's funny what happens in families. Viola Manning married into the Manning family, which was a large family and friends, and in Chehalis. Okay, they didn't tell her that when he came back from the Second World War that he had not gonorrhea. What was the one that's really bad?
Oh, like syphilis?
Yeah,
Or-
he had syphilis. She had this child, and he died and then the symptoms came out, and they Valerie realized what he had. Of course, working in there, but he luckily for usually it goes into the children. It didn't happen to
Patricia.
to Patricia.
Uh-huh.
He Viola sent him over to the VA hospital, the big one over there on Sepulveda.
On Sepulveda. Okay.
You know,
Uh-huh.
the huge one. And he lived there and he died there. Patricia thought her father had died, and they never told her until she was a teenager that her father was there.
Wow. Oh, so he was like there for the whole time.
Oh yes, oh yes. He deteriorated where he was mad, you know.
Oh boy.
Oh yes.
That's serious. That's a
Oh,
big.
oh yes.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
And
But can you imagine that? Here was a family, another family from the same small community, and they were close friends. You know, I mean, the families were close, and they didn't tell her that he had syphilis.
jeez.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was okay, so Viola's here,
Where is Viola?
right there.
Okay.
Right?
Uh-huh. And Viola, she married somebody named, I don't know.
So there's a bunch of brothers and sisters that are kind of like
Oh, yes.
Judith,
Oh,
Judy.
yes. Now, that was Pat. She's the one that owned the doctor, what's now the doctor's hospital in Van Nuys. And she owned that hospital because it was left to her by whoever. And we lived with
So
her.
most of these people came south, it seems. What about
Yeah.
Harold?
Harold is married.
Well, he died in 39.
Right, but he is Mary's, grandfather.
Okay.
Okay. Some strange things have happened to people in the family. Really.
Mhm. And then, so what, so you were down here, but you went back up, right? Because I think you went to high school in Chehalis,
Yes, I
right?
went to high school in Chehalis. Then, when I was a senior in high school, and I don't know why, it was in December, and we moved down to Los Angeles again. I don't
Okay.
know why.
Right. So, so you guys were down in LA and then you went back up there. How old were you when you went back up?
I don't remember.
Was it
I
like
only-
junior high or?
Oh, no. It was before then. But that's the reason I skipped 2 grades. Schools at that time were A and B, or you call them 1 and 2, the semesters. And you had, when I went down to Los Angeles, they skipped me 1 semester.
Mhm.
Then when I came back up to Seattle again, or came back up to Chehalis, they put me up another half. So that put me a year ahead, you know.
Right.
But
So then you come back to LA
yeah,
and then what?
My mother worked at the Veterans Hospital during the Second World War,
Uh-huh.
which is now Birmingham Hospital in Van Nuys,
Okay.
you know. And at that time, we lived with my aunt at the hospital not Birmingham Hospital, her private hospital, and it was at the corner of where Van Nuys Boulevard turns into, oh, I can't remember.
Like where it hits Ventura Boulevard or something like
No,
that, or?
Ventura Boulevard is up further, and then Van Nuys Boulevard goes down. It's through Van Nuys, and it's on the other side.
Huh.
And anyway, now it goes all the way through, but I think it's now called Doctor's Hospital. It was a private hospital that she owned, and I was I was going to school. I was a senior in high school, going to school, and they thought I had strep throat. I was put into my aunt's hospital. And my aunt was sure that I had diphtheria. And she took she had tests taken. They never came out positive. So I was still in the hospital, and I remember this. All of a sudden my door closed, because I knew all the nurses there. All of a sudden my door closed and nobody came in. And they had taken another test, and I had diphtheria, which is at that time was a very serious deal. You know, they couldn't keep me in the hospital; they had to quarantine the hospital. And my aunt was very, good friends with people who owned the ambulance services and everything. Well, if they put me in an ambulance, they had to what they call autoclave, and that's sterilize
Yeah.
the whole ambulance. Finally, she got somebody to do it, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was the only big ambulance company, and she was friends with the owner. They took me down to the county hospital, and I was in there for a month because I couldn't talk, I couldn't do anything,
Jeez.
and they didn't know if I was going to live. My mother had terrible case of hemorrhoids at the time, and she couldn't sit, so she never came down to see me. But I was there, and I remember them talking outside, the doctors talking outside of my room, and remember them saying, "We may have to remove her vocal cords." And I don't know why or anything, but I thought, God, I didn't know what was going on. Finally, they gave me a double dosage of the antitoxin, and I recovered, but I was in the hospital for a month. And then I went back home, and I had missed the end of my senior year, and obviously since I had transferred from another school, they weren't going to let me graduate, so I never did graduation. I finished later, but that was something.
That's
you
a
know.
big deal.
Oh, it was a big deal. They had to quarantine my aunt's hospital.
Yeah.
Auto-
Oh, on many levels.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Oh,
weird
yeah.
thinking,
Oh, well, I ended up with...
nobody came to visit you? Wow.
I was in a quarantine deal,
Yeah.
but I ended
Wow.
up with some kind of a heart problem or something, vitamins or something. But I used to have to go over to my aunt after I got out. I used to have to go over to my aunt's hospital and lower my pants, and they'd have to give me a shot every week.
Mhm.
And I was not well for a while. My aunt talked about my going, and it's really funny. Her and my mother had another thing she had done after she worked, and I don't know when she did it. I don't remember when she did it, but it was after she had worked for this Italian man. She went to school to become an accountant, and so that's what she did, And so here she had all this education, to do, and yet she never mentioned, ever pushed me to go to college or even mentioned it.
Mhm.
My aunt Pat was going to send me to college. She talked about that, but I wasn't able to do it at that time. My mother was a heavy drinker at that time, and all I wanted to do was get out of the house. So as soon as I got my graduation deal, I left and went up to San Francisco and lived I worked for the Navy, the
Wow.
military on Treasure Island.
Really?
Oh yeah, I was up there when they had the people trying to break out of Treasure Island.
Oh, I
They-
don't know.
Oh yeah, they had a time when somebody, they were trying to, you could see the gunfire from Treasure Island. These prisoners had, I don't know what
Wait,
they.
you mean Alcatraz or
Yeah,
Treasure?
Alcatraz, and it was.
But you were on Treasure Island, which
Oh
is
yeah, I
in
was
between
Treasure.
Oakland
Oh
and...
yes,
yeah.
I was on Treasure Island.
That's where you
working there.
lived?
That's where I worked.
Right.
I lived in San Francisco in a one room. I lived in a house or in a big place where I had one room, and I remember I didn't make much money, and I had to get back and forth to work every. So when I get my paycheck, or before I get my paycheck, I live on a jar of peanut butter and a thing of crackers, a package of crackers, until
Right.
my check came in.
Right.
Oh
right.
yeah,
Survivalist food.
that's right. That's why I've done a lot of things like that, and everybody did them at that time. And so when I hear these young girls or people your age, a little bit younger, moan about, oh, I have this, I have that, I think, hey, don't tell me, don't talk to me,
Yeah.
because
No, very different
very
context
different
and
context.
a lot more
They're
disease
used to having
and...
a lot more,
Right.
you know.
Well, I think people were closer to death and disease and
Right. Oh,
many other
absolutely.
things.
And they weren't given everything. You worked for anything. People, sure, we're well off now, but Bill and I have both worked for everything we've ever gotten. Bill,
Well,
we
people
were
are
talk-
much
we were
more
talking
rich
about
now.
we were talking about the toilet paper, and Bill said to me, he laughed. He said, we never had toilet paper when I was a kid. It was newspapers.
Right.
You say that to somebody now, and they would go, "Oh my God!" It's it's a different world.
No, it's an interesting one with this whole, the pandemic here and kind
Uh-huh.
of what that means and how
Right.
people are reacting and
Right. Right. They've never seen anything like this.
what they're. It seems pretty arbitrary to get toilet paper out of everything that one would need, but so you go up to San Francisco, and
And
then
I worked for the Navy
uh-huh.
at Treasure Island.
What were you doing there?
I was a clerk, a supply clerk.
Uh-huh.
And that's when I really learned to hate civil service. They had some really dumb people there.
Yeah.
I didn't have any
people are
education,
people.
and yet I had some common sense. Those people had no common sense. And boy, they ripped off the government like you wouldn't believe, and I know it still goes on,
Yeah.
you know.
No, that's
I mean-
what people do.
Yeah. They load up their cars after they get through work, with supplies. And,
Right. And so then what? So you're there and you're working,
Uh-huh.
and then what? Then what? What happens?
Then I met Terry's father, and he was in the military. And this sounds terrible. I was extremely naive. I was younger than everybody at high school when I was in Chehalis, and so I was maybe 15 when they were maybe 17. They treated me like a little sister. So I was extremely naive. Well, I'm sure I went along with it, but we had sex.
Uh-huh.
And with Terry's father, I did. And I always thought I had to get married if I had sex, period. So we
Right.
got married, and I had Terry. But, you know, like I said, I was pretty naive. You say that to a girl now, and they go, ha, you know,
Right.
you know,
So you get pregnant, right?
right?
And then
Went to live
what?
in, he got out of the service, and we went to Florida. That's where he came
Oh, so
from.
he was.
He was
He
from
didn't go
Florida.
there. You didn't go there when he was in the service.
Oh,
It
no,
was.
no, no, no. He was, you know, a drafty or whatever, you know.
What
And
was he like?
he was okay. Well, my history is colors it because we had some horrible, horrible times after that. But we went down there, and they very definitely resented me. His family did, because I was a California girl. I was not from the South,
Uh-huh.
and the whole thing, you know. And I had the baby, and his only brother, Sonny, uh, they weren't able to, or they couldn't get pregnant, and so that really created a problem. His father, uh, his father was very nice, but Terry was born with what they call pyloric stenosis, and he was very ill. A baby, there's a kind of a valve here in your stomach, and it pushes the food down. Caloric stenosis, it pushes the food back up, and he would vomit and it would go across the room. He couldn't gain any weight, and he was very ill because of all this. You know, we lived across the street from a fire station, and they were always on call to come and help. You know, and of course me, I had never even I babysat for one person, and I didn't know anything about children. I had a nervous breakdown. I really did. And my mother came out from Washington, or from California,
Correct.
and I went home with her with the baby, and stayed there. But and he came later, and he
So
had
he stayed there, and you
yeah,
came back.
yeah, and he had a job, and finally he came out, and I don't know, things just fell apart, you know, it just fell apart, and he left, and he went to
So wait, what was his name? I don't know if he shows up in here. This whole thing like locked up again.
James Smith.
James Smith. So he
Uh-huh.
doesn't show up at all.
No, he doesn't. But anyway, um,
Huh.
I divorced him, and oh, I didn't divorce him at the time. I didn't have the money to do it. He came, and he decided he was going to take the baby.
Oh
So-
boy.
Oh yeah, he took the baby. I called the police, and the police came and they said, "Well, do you have any? Are you, you know, do you have any paperwork that says that he can't take him?" Because we were still married, and I said no. They couldn't stop him from taking the baby, so he took the. Oh yeah,
Wow.
and he took the baby, and I called his father in 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 uh, in Florida, and told him, "You've got to come out here." You know, and I told him,
Wait. So who took the baby? You.
"My husband."
Yeah. Okay. So then
took
they
the-
went back to Florida.
No, no. He took the baby and took
Took
it
Terry.
to Chino or someplace wherever he was living. I didn't know. I didn't know anything about him, where he
Wow.
was.
So
or
it's
anything.
James Smith.
Yeah. No, James Smith, yeah. James
I'm just filling this in
James
now.
Myrtle Smith was his name. My husband.
Mer.
Yeah.
M-E-Y-R-L?
M-E-R-L.
M-E-R-L-E.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And so his father came out, and he got the baby back for me, and he took him home. He took him home.
Took Terry.
Terry, no,
Or,
no, he didn't take Terry. Terry is my son.
yeah.
His name was James, but one of them was called Sonny. I can't even remember what they called him. Anyway, he took him back home, and I got a divorce. After that, years and years later, I had a Catholic priest contact me, and he said, this man wants you to say that it was never consummated, or some dumb thing like this, because he wanted to get married again in the Catholic Church.
Oh, gotcha.
So, yeah, so I signed some people, something like
So-
that. But he never had any interest. He never contacted Terry. Nothing ever come.
And so Terry is out in wherever, Chino?
Yeah.
And
No. Terry is my son.
Yeah.
Jim is out in Chino, and he took the baby to wherever he was living. He just left. I didn't know where he was.
Right, but then did you get
That's when
did you
I
get
called.
Terry back, or did
Yes.
like instantly, or
No, I called his father, Jim's father, in Florida, and I said, "This is what's happened. You've got to come out here and do something." So he came out
Wait,
here.
who's Jim's father? That's what confuses me. They're both Jim, right?
Yeah, I
One's
know.
James, one's
That's
Jim.
what they're all like, Anyway, my father-in-law, I called him, and he came out, and he took Jim back to Florida.
Okay.
And so I never heard another word about anything.
And then,
period.
so then you got Terry back.
Then I got Terry back.
Okay.
He got Terry back. For
That's
me.
where I was.
Yeah. No, I understand.
I didn't know if he went, like he left him with somebody in
No,
Chino,
no.
and
No. Well, apparently he had somebody take care of him. I don't know, because I never got the details.
And so was there any back and forth after that?
Nope. He never wanted anything to do with Terry. He never contacted him. I never heard anything again about him.
Huh. So now you have Terry, and
Uh-huh.
because I remember there was a thing where Terry, when he was discharged, right?
Uh-huh.
Where he, like, it read like he was adopted, right?
He was adopted by William Hogan. He was
Wait, hang
in-
on. When
he
you
was-
do that,
Oh,
you move
okay,
the
I'm
camera.
sorry. Bill Hogan was from Chehalis.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in high school up there, he was in the Navy, and he would come, and we started going out. His mother told me. It's really funny. He was no good. Don't ever marry him. To me, he was always very good. And so somehow he contacted me again in Van Nuys,
Mm-hmm.
and
Let me do this. Let me start